Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, daily newspaper analysis. Today is 7th January 2026, and today we have some topics for our analysis. The first topic is about the recent Shanti Bill and how it is going to introduce some changes in India's nuclear energy generation. The second most important topic is about India's skilling programs and the outcomes of these programs. And the third topic is about the biomaterials. We'll be understanding what exactly are these biomaterials and why there is a need to focus on these biomaterials from the India's point of view. And then we'll also understand the air quality index, particularly this poor air quality index in Delhi, and what are the main causes of it, and how this poor air quality is controlled in Delhi by Commission for Air Quality Management as a statutory body. So we'll be understanding, and this analysis is going to be very interesting. So let's understand these topics one by one. The first topic is about the Shanti Bill. So let's understand about this Shanti Bill. Now, in fact, recently the government has introduced this Shanti Bill, and Shanti Bill, if we talk about the meaning of this Shanti Bill, it is specifically the sustainable harnessing and advancement of nuclear energy in India. So this specifically dealing with nuclear energy generation in India. Now earlier also we have talked about this Shanti Bill. Now the main objective of this Shanti Bill is to allow the nuclear energy generation for the private sector. So as of now, before this Shanti Bill, nuclear energy generation is completely controlled by the government. So through this sustainable harnessing and advancement of nuclear energy in India, the private sector will be allowed into the nuclear energy generation as well. So therefore, this will help India achieve some ambitious targets that becoming net zero by the year 2070. And this will also help substantially increase nuclear energy generation, which is one of the clean fuels, right? So in fact, we also have the objective of generating 100 gigawatt of nuclear energy by the year 2047. So all these goals can be achieved if we allow private sector, because we know the advantages of the private sector. Private sector will have technology, they have efficiency, and they have better, they can invest better. So because of all these advantages, it is important to attract the private sector into the nuclear energy generation, both domestic investment as well as the foreign investment as well. Now let's understand the brief background about this. Now in fact, for the first time since 1956 onwards, now nuclear energy generation or nuclear sector in India is completely state controlled. However, through this Shanti Bill, or if it is passed by the parliament, so private sector will be allowed into the nuclear energy generation. The private sector, both domestic as well as foreign players, will come and invest in the nuclear energy generation. Earlier it was not allowed. However, understand why this Shanti Bill or allowing private sector into the nuclear energy generation is very important. So it is important for India's energy security. Remember, as we have some ambitious goals. So the first one is 100 gigawatt of nuclear energy generation by the year 2047. This is one goal. And the second goal is clean energy generation, because nuclear energy is also a form of clean energy because it emits very less amount of greenhouse gases. So therefore it is also a form of clean energy, and apart from that it also ensures a technological advancements. So therefore these are all the advantages of allowing private sector into the nuclear energy generation. However, there are some concerns as well. So concerns are primarily about the liability in case of an accident. Liability, particularly this is associated with the safety of these nuclear reactors, and there should be some transparency and the public safety as well. So these are concerns. There are both advantages and disadvantages as well, right? So let's understand briefly the background of India's nuclear energy generation. So if we can understand the background, so we can get into it in detailed way. So as of now, India have around 25 nuclear reactors, right? So in different parts of the country, we have 25 nuclear reactors, and these 25 nuclear reactors are in 7 nuclear power plants. For example, Kudamkulam is a nuclear power plant. So within Kudamkulam nuclear power plant, there are some nuclear reactors. So 3 to 4 nuclear reactors. So across 7 nuclear power plants, we have 25 nuclear reactors. Now understand that all these nuclear reactors and power plants are managed by the NPCIL. So NPCIL is Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. So this Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited it is a state agency, right? So state agency means a government controlled agency. So this is a government controlled agency, and it is currently managing all 25 nuclear reactors which are part of the 7 nuclear power plants across India, right? Now if we talk about all these 25 nuclear reactors, within 25, 21 nuclear reactors are pressurized heavy water reactors, right? So this is a type of a nuclear reactor, and four are light water reactors, right? So heavy water reactors are 21 and 4 are light water reactors, which are different type of nuclear reactors which are used to produce nuclear energy in India. However, in India, the nuclear energy generation or nuclear energy program is largely indigenous in nature. What exactly is this indigenous? Indigenous means the domestic technology. So the domestic capital or state control. So therefore, it is largely indigenous in nature because we don't largely allow the foreign sector participation into India's nuclear energy, keeping in mind the safety concerns. However, in India's nuclear energy generation program, it is actually based on 3-stage fuel cycle, and it aimed at utilizing its vast thorium reserves. Because this 3-stage fuel cycle is mainly suitable for the thorium reserves in these nuclear power plants and nuclear reactors, right? So why we have adopted the 3-stage fuel cycle? Because we have a thorium reserves and we need to utilize these thorium reserves to generate nuclear energy, and that's why we have adopted a 3-stage fuel cycle, right? So in India, there are some institutions like Baba Atomic Research Institute, Research Center, which is also called as BARC, and National Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. So in fact, both these institutions have largely achieved self-sufficiency in reactor design, fuel reprocessing, and even waste management. So that's why you can say that India's nuclear program is largely indigenous, and there are 2 institutions. One is Baba Atomic Research Center and another is Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. So they actually achieved self-sufficiency in reactor design, fuel reprocessing, and waste management. And also understand that this nuclear power as of now contributes less than 3% of India's total energy mix. For example, if India's total energy generation is 100 gigawatt, so nuclear energy is contributing less than 3 gigawatt of total energy that is produced in India. So therefore, there is a need to substantially scale up the nuclear energy generation in India, and that's why this Shanti Bill will allow substantial or increasing participation of the private sector to generate a huge amount of nuclear power and also increase the contribution of nuclear energy in the total energy mix, right? So apart from that, you could also go through the important features, significance, and the main aspects of this Shanti Bill as well. So it talks about the private sector entry, because the private sector will come up with capital, technology, and other advantages. Then, so there will be advanced reactor technologies if we allow foreign investment into the nuclear energy generation, because of huge potential in India we have. And then SMR means small modular reactors. So instead of setting up large modular reactors, why don't we have a small modular reactors? So they are they can be set up in an industrial cluster, so to provide power to that particular industrial cluster. So they are very small scale in nature, and they also generate a lesser amount of nuclear energy. So therefore, this Shanti Bill will also focus on the small modular nuclear reactors. And then there will be a new rules, and these new rules expanded 100 gigawatt target by the year 2047, and it will also help India become net zero by 2070, that we have a goal, right? So key players including Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, L&T, and other key players as well, right? Now in this context, so let's understand the key features of this Shanti Bill. What are the key features? What are the essential features of this Shanti Bill? Now, in fact, this Shanti Bill is actually considered as establishing an overarching framework, and this overarching framework will govern everything with respect to nuclear energy generation in India. right? So earlier, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited is completely having a huge dominance, or it is completely dominating the nuclear energy generation in India. Nuclear energy generation in India is completely dominated by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, and it is a government agency, right? So it is a government agency. However, now in India, the nuclear energy generation is completely, under the Shanti Bill and its framework. So therefore, we could say that it is an overarching framework that actually dismantles the dominance of the Nuclear Power Corporation of India, and therefore it is going to introduce the public-private partnership in nuclear energy generation in India. So to achieve public-private partnership in nuclear energy generation and to govern all other framework related to the nuclear energy generation, this Shanti Bill 2025 has been brought in. Right. So let's understand the key features, the major features of this Shanti Bill. So that is very important. We have to understand the key features and major features of it. Right. Now, in fact, within this Shanti Bill, 49% of the private participation would be allowed. Private participation. Right. So 49% of the private participation and 51% of the government participation or the government control. For example, any industry. So 100% control of an industry by the government means, so there will be no private participation. So it is 100% controlled by the government. For example, there is an industry called A. Now in this industry, 49% of the stake will be controlled by the private sector, and the remaining 51% stake will be controlled by the government sector. So therefore, it is a public-private partnership, right? So however, this 51% stake of the government in the nuclear energy generation in a nuclear power plant particularly controls some sensitive sectors such as fuel production, waste management, safety of nuclear power plants, and licensing. Right. So apart from that, in this 49%, the private the private capital, the private investment in nuclear energy generation, they focus on they can own a nuclear reactor, they can build, they can operate the nuclear power plants, right? So apart from that, we should also understand the other thing is that the foreign suppliers can actually participate through FDI, though FDI is not explicitly permitted, right? So under Shanti Bill, FDI is not explicitly permitted, but foreign suppliers can also supply these nuclear reactors to the nuclear power plants. And apart from that, the another very important feature of this Shanti Bill is small modular reactors, right? So these small modular reactors are small in capacity in terms of power generation, low cost in terms of its installation and operation. And apart from that, in terms of safety, it is having less safety related concerns as well. So therefore, the government is also focusing on the small modular reactors. And in fact, recently the government has also launched a nuclear energy mission with the total estimated outlay of 20,000 crore rupees. With that, the government has launched small modular reactors, nuclear mission, national nuclear mission. Right. Now in this context, the government is planning to further strengthen the role of Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. Right. Now under this Shanti Bill, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board will be given the statutory status, and therefore the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board will also be answerable to the Parliament for its activities. Right. So therefore, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board has been made answerable to the Parliament. Along with that, it has been given the statutory status as well. Right. So therefore, when it is answerable to the Parliament, it increases the institutional oversight over the functioning of the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. Now let's understand this Atomic Energy Regulatory Board is actually responsible for a certain things. So to what extent it is responsible? So what are its functions? For example, it is responsible for a nuclear safety, a very important arena, and it is also important for radiation protection of the atmosphere, of the people and the natural resources. Secondly, So it is also responsible for licensing and even inspections of these nuclear power plants and nuclear reactors. And then emergency preparedness and even quality assurance. So these are the three elements which actually looked into, and with respect to these three elements, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board is responsible and answerable to the Parliament. Right. So therefore, as we already knew that with the Shanti Bill, what has been happening, the private sector participation in the nuclear energy generation is going to increase. So therefore, in this context, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board becomes central to ensuring safety though critics warn of over-centralization of the regulatory power as well. Right. Now you can also understand through Shanti Bill which area is opened for the private sector and which area is still controlled by the government. A distinction has been made here. Now let's understand the liability regime and what has been changed so far with respect to liability. Now what exactly is a liability? So liability actually means what if in case of an accident in this nuclear power plant. In case of an accident in a nuclear power plant, it may cause large scale damages. It may cause large scale damage to the environment, ecosystem, biodiversity, health of the people, and it also degrades the natural resources as well. So since the private sector is going to be part of nuclear energy generation, it is important to fix this liability clause. So therefore, in case of an accident, the private sector, the company which is actually responsible for the maintenance of this nuclear power plant or nuclear reactor, has to pay a certain amount of money as a liability. Right. So if we talk about this liability framework, those nuclear power plants which generate 3600 megawatt of nuclear power, they have to pay a liability of rupees 3000 crore rupees in case of an accident. Secondly, there are some medium power plants, nuclear power plants which generate less than 3600 megawatt. They have to pay 1500 crore as a liability. And small modular reactors, as I've already told you that these small modular reactors are also nuclear reactors which generate a smaller amount of nuclear energy, like around 150 megawatt of nuclear energy that they could generate, and the liability on them is around 100 crore. So therefore, the Shanti Bill has also provided the liability for the nuclear power plants in case of a major accidents, ensuring safety of the nuclear power plants management. Right. Now in this context, the union government, for example, what if the liability, if the damage is more than 3000 crore, the government has fixed for the large nuclear power plants, the liability would be 3000 crore. What if the damage is more than 3000 crore? What will happen in that case? So in that case, for example, a nuclear accident took place and the damage is 5000 crore. The damage is 5000 crore and it is a large nuclear plant, right? So it is a large nuclear power plant. Now in that case, the private sector liability is 3000 crore and remaining 2000 crore liability amount would be borne by the central government. Right. So it is proposed, central government has also already proposed this nuclear liability fund, and therefore in case of any extra amount, any extra damage more than this prescribed liability, the extra damage would be borne by the central government. Right. Now in this context, so there we have a Civil Liability and Nuclear Damage Act of 2010. Now in fact, this Shanti Bill is going to remove the supplier liability entirely from this, so that those who are supplying nuclear reactors, so therefore they are now no longer pay the liability in case of an accident. So therefore it will address the investor concerns but raising safety questions. For example, a country which has been a private entity which has been supplying nuclear reactors, in case of an accident, if they don't have the liability, of course it may raise the concerns about the safety of that nuclear reactor. Right. So therefore it has raised such concerns with respect to nuclear reactors. right? So what is the government's rationale to come up with this Shanti bill? Why government is interested to pass this Shanti bill? So let's understand this aspect as well. Now, in fact, the government is saying that nuclear power can be generated 24/7, unlike solar and wind. So understand that solar energy can be generated during daytime. Nighttime, solar energy cannot be generated, and during the monsoon and winter seasons also, the capacity to generate solar energy is also not maximum. And for example, with respect to wind energy, it cannot be generated 24/7, right? So there is a need for a wind to generate this wind energy. But unlike solar and wind energy, nuclear energy can be generated 24/7. So that is the advantage, and that's why we need to invest in the nuclear energy generation, right? So in India, more than 50% of the total power is generated from the thermal power plants, right? So thermal power plants. So what is the problem with these thermal power plants? The problem with these thermal power plants is that they use coal as a raw material to generate energy or electricity. Now, when they use coal contributes to the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So therefore, it causes global warming and climate change. But unlike coal and these thermal power plants, nuclear power plants would generate near zero greenhouse gas emissions. So therefore, it will benefit India to help meet its climate commitments. Right, so we also have certain climate commitments. For example, one such climate commitment is that India will become net zero by the year 2070. Becoming net zero by the year 2070. Right, so climate change, global warming is a concern for any country, and it is a concern for India also. We have certain climate commitments. In order to meet the climate commitments, we must reduce the use of fossil fuels. We must reduce the usage of fossil fuels like coal and other hydrocarbons. Right. So apart from that, through this Shanti bill, government is planning to revive nuclear deals with countries like France, US, Japan, and reducing over reliance on countries like Russia. Right. Now, what is the criticism against this Shanti bill? Now, the major criticism against this Shanti bill is that dilution of this polluter pays principle. Now, polluter pays principle actually means that those who are polluting the environment, they need to pay the cost. They need to pay for the damages. This is the polluter pays principle. However, Shanti bill is going to dilute this polluter pays principle. And in fact, as I've already explained you that in 1984, because of methyl isocyanate, there was an accident in Bhopal. Right, so there was an accident. Union Carbide Company, which is a pesticide manufacturing company, because of the methyl isocyanate gas in Bhopal in 1984, so hundreds of people were killed. Right, so if we allow private sector, if we reduce the liability amount, and there is no liability on the nuclear reactor suppliers, in case of an accident, then liability would be evaded. Right, so this is another major concern. And Fukushima is a nuclear reactor in Japan, and during I think 2009 there was a tsunami in Japan. So during that point of time, the Fukushima nuclear reactor accident took place. Right, so in fact, this has also caused a large scale damage. So therefore, keeping in mind all these things, so Shanti bill is important to achieve ambitious targets, but at the same time, there should be a liability and there should be adequate public safety as well when it comes to operation of these nuclear power plants. So I hope you have understood this, and the next important topic is India's skilling outcomes. Let's understand India's skilling outcomes in detail. Right, so in fact, for any country, skill development is very important. Right, so in fact, we have an educated youth, but we lack skills. So because of lack of skills, we become unemployable. Why? Because we are lacking the essential skills that industry requires. Right, so however, the other angle is that India is a country with a huge demographic dividend, and this is also very well known fact. So what exactly is demographic dividend? So demographic dividend actually means that large number of people who are in the working age. Large number of people in the working age is actually considered as the demographic dividend. So what exactly demographic window? There is another concept called demographic window. So if we talk about this demographic window, a demographic window actually means that we have a demographic dividend. We have a large number of people who are in the young age or working age population. However, this large number of population cannot remain young for more number of years, like around 20 to 25 years. This young workforce will remain young. It will remain as a young workforce and it will contribute to Indian economy, and this next 20 to 25 years is considered as demographic window for India. So therefore, it is the time that India need to invest in skilling of its existing youth so that we can better utilize the existing demographic dividend in a most effective manner. Right. So in this context, let's understand India's skilling framework and skill architecture. Now, in this context, we have to talk about, the skilling ecosystem in India. Right. So under the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, so it was launched in 2015. From 2015 to 2025, it has provided skills or skilling to 1.40 crore candidates. Right. So therefore, this Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana is one of the largest skilling ecosystems in India. So despite such a large scale that it has provided skilling to 1.40 crore youth, skilling has failed to become an aspirational pathway for Indian youth. Right. So even though such ambitious skill development programs have been launched, the employability of the youth is still remains low. And the wages for those youth who are already employed is also low, and there is lack of job security for the youth who got employment after this skill development. So therefore, the skilling has been facing a lot of problems in India, despite India has launched several programs. For example, if you look at the major skilling programs in India, for example, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, it is a skilling program. Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Kendras, which are actually part of this Kaushal Vikas Yojana. And then integration with general education, vocational education, and Jan Shikshan Sanstans were established. Pradhan Mantri Yuva Yojana was launched, and even Sankalp and Strive were also launched to promote vocational education for the students. So that is also part of integration with the general education, and this is all part of an architecture under the Skill India mission. So despite such schemes, despite youth in India are provided skills, but it has not been giving desired results. Right. So let's understand some important facts with respect to skilling in India. So if we talk about those facts, the gross enrollment ratio in higher education stands at 28%. However, the National Education Policy 2020, right? So we knew that in 2020 we had the National Education Policy, and this National Education Policy has targeted that the gross enrollment ratio in higher education should be reached to 50% by the year 2035. So this is one of the ambitious goal that we have to achieve in India by the year 2035. However, if we talk about the skilling, so skills remain disconnected with the mainstream education, right? So it remain disconnected with the mainstream education. Why? Because if you join any college, if you are pursuing graduation, you just focus on the general education, there is less focus on the skills and skill development. So this is evident from the fact that only 4.1% of India's total workforce is given or actually received actually formal vocational training along with the education, right? So it is just marginally higher than a decade ago. So a decade ago it was just a 2%, but after a decade now it has been reached to 4.1%. So they actually reached get vocational education, they actually received vocational education along with the general education. This number is still 4.1%. However, if you look at this Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, so what are these countries? These are the developed countries in the West, for example, the European countries. So the OECD countries, they enroll nearly 44% of the upper secondary students in vocational tracks. Now compare schools in Europe with the schools in India. Right? So in India, only 4.1% have got the vocational education, but in West, particularly in Europe, 44% of the total workforce have got this vocational training. However, in countries like Australia and Finland, those who get the vocational education is above 70%. So therefore, India need to learn some important lessons from these countries, and there is a need to increase vocational education, vocational training for the students along with the general education as well. However, the India Skills Report of 2025, so it actually highlights the post-degree skilling is not a mass behavior. So therefore, it has been reflecting a weak social signaling and limited economic return from the certifications, right? So in fact, there are also sector skill councils. There is a failure of the sector skill councils as well in India. So why the sector skill councils are actually failed? So they are failed because they are designed as industry facing bodies to define certain standards and ensuring employability. But the sector skill councils are actually failed to give outcomes. So that is the problem here. Even though they have established with the objective of providing employment to the skilled individuals, but they failed to come up with desired outcomes. Now, in fact, the skilling value chain is actually fragmented. So fragmented in the sense that training is provided by somebody else. There will be no assessment or poor assessment. There will be poor certification and even placement. So all these things are differently done by different agencies, different institutions, different individuals. So that's where there is a fragmentation, and it is handled by different entities, and it further dilutes the existing accountability on the skill development frameworks, right? So in fact, the employer surveys are also showing that these skill councils certifications carry a weak signaling value compared to degree or prior experiences. Now industries are asking for the experiences. However, there are some industry-led certifications as well. For example, Amazon, so it also provides industry-led certification. Google also provides certification. So they actually have the credibility than this sector skill councils, because they are not working in silos, or they are not working in different entities. There are no different entities for certification, placement, assessment. Rather, they have the credibility, and they have graded assessment, and the employability outcomes are also everything is tightly linked here in this context. However, what should be the way forward? Now, if we talk about the way forward in this context, so India's skilling challenge is fundamentally an accountability deficit, not a funding gap. So there is adequate funding because we have launched several programs within the Skill India program. So there is adequate funding as well, but the problem is that there is an accountability deficit. Accountability deficit actually means that despite providing all the facilities, all the infrastructure, these institutions which are actually established to provide skill development, they are not providing the skills in a letter and spirit, focusing on the industry demands, focusing on the employability, focusing on the retention of those employees. So that's the problem. That is the accountability deficit. However, now every state, there are graduation colleges, they are giving graduation certificates, everybody is pursuing graduation. So why don't we include skills along with these degree programs? Why don't you provide skills which are required by the industry? And then expanding the workplace based learning through the National Apprenticeship Program. Right, so National Apprenticeship Program also, there should be work-based learning and strengthening initiatives like PM Setu for ITI modernization, and that can realign the incentives as well. So however, holding the sector skill councils accountable for placement outcomes, treating industry as a co-owner in skill development, providing skills, and then integrating the skilling programs with the formal education. So all these factors are essential in achieving the objective of Skill India and also better utilizing existing demographic dividend in India. Right, so this is how we could actually better use the demographic dividend, and the demographic window can also be used in a more sustainable way. Next topic is about the biomaterials. Let's understand what exactly are these biomaterials. So biomaterials, no, let's first understand what are these biomaterials and why India is focusing on these biomaterials. Right, now in fact, circular economy, everybody knows about this circular economy. Now circular economy is an economy where we recycle the waste and produce new products. So this is the circular economy. For example, we have got the mobile phone, right? So mobile phone require some essential raw material to manufacture, right? So there is some raw material that is required to manufacture this mobile phone. However, after the end of the life of this mobile phone, why don't we recycle this mobile phone and extract the components out of this mobile phone to manufacture a new mobile phone, so that we can minimize our dependence on extraction of raw materials. So therefore, we can use these raw materials in substantial way by minimizing their use and recycling the existing old devices or old material to produce new ones. So which is a circular economy, right? So this is a circular economy. Now, so around the world, countries are transitioning towards low carbon because carbon generate greenhouse gas emissions and it results in global warming and climate change. And circular manufacturing also. Circular manufacturing reduces the dependence on these raw materials. It reduces the exploitation of the natural resources, right? So that's why countries have been transitioning towards low carbon and circular manufacturing. Now in this context, these biomaterials are emerging as a transformative alternative to fossil fuel based materials, right? So however, these biomaterials are derived from the biological sources or bioengineered processes. Now, biomaterials are very often offering sustainable solutions across sectors such as packaging industry, textile industry, construction industry, and healthcare industry. So these are the sectors where the biomaterials are actually offering sustainable solutions, which is aligned with economic growth, with the environmental stewardship in India. Right. So let's understand what exactly are these biomaterials. Now, biomaterials are some materials which are produced wholly or partially from renewable biological sources. So there are some biological sources which can be renewed, and the materials which are actually produced from these biological sources, such as plants, from microbes, from agricultural residues, or manufactured using these biological processes like fermentation, enzyme conversion. So these are known as the biomaterials. This is the definition of biomaterials, right? So these biomaterials are designed to replace and even complement or enhance the conventional petroleum based materials, at the same time reducing the environmental footprint as well. So it will help in sustainable development, circular economy, and reducing environmental footprint, reducing the carbon emissions, right? So here, if you talk about the biomaterials, for example, there are some natural biomaterials and man-made biomaterials as well. So wood is a natural rubber, human animal tissues, these are natural biomaterials. There are some man-made biomaterials as well. So biomaterials are made from the renewable biological sources, right? Now in this context, what are the different types of biomaterials? There are three different types of biomaterials. So one is drop-in biomaterials. So these drop-in biomaterials are chemically identical to conventional plastics, and they can be used in existing manufacturing systems as well. The best example is BioPET. So this BioPET is derived from plant-based ethanol, Therefore, it is biodegradable in nature. Second one is drop out biomaterials. The drop out biomaterials are chemically different biomaterials and they actually require new processing or disposal systems. For example, polylactic acid PLA. So this polylactic acid made from fermented sugars, and it is biodegradable and compostable, and it can be used for packaging and even disposable packets as well. So therefore, understand one thing, that we could reduce our dependence on the fossil fuels with this. And then the third category is novel biomaterials. These novel biomaterials can actually offer new and enhanced properties beyond the conventional materials. For example, the self-healing materials, bioactive medical implants. So all are three different types of biomaterials. Now let's understand how do the biomaterials actually work. Right. So we have understood that these biomaterials are produced from the biological resources, renewable biological sources. However, the biomaterials are produced by converting biological feedstock. What biological feedstock? For example, sugarcane, maize, agricultural residue. So this is biological feedstock, and this biological feedstock can be used to produce the biomaterials. The biomaterials are biodegradable in nature. They are compostable in nature. Right. So in fact, these biodegradable feedstock can be used into polymers or materials through a biochemical and thermochemical processes. Right. So what key steps are included in this process? If we talk about the key steps, feedstock extraction, starches, sugar, cellulose, and bioconversion, it is also another step where using microbes or enzymes, and polymerization to form stable usable materials, and processing and shaping into final products. So these are the key steps which are actually included in the conversion of these biological feedstock into polymers or materials. Right. However, why these biomaterials are important for a country like India? Right. Now, in fact, a biomaterial sector helps India aligns with multiple national priorities. So how it helps India aligns with multiple national priorities? So environmental sustainability is one aspect, right? So for example, it will help in reduction of single-use plastic. Secondly, it will ensure energy security because we no longer depend ourselves on fossil fuel based imports. Now, in fact, these fossil fuels are also used in manufacturing plastics. And then it will also help farmer income diversification. For example, the stubble can be used, the residue can be used for manufacturing these biomaterials. Of course, farmers will earn income apart from his crop, his produce, and then export competitiveness as well. Because there is a huge global demand and India can become an export hub of these biomaterials from India to other countries as well. Right. So however, if you look at the total demand of the bioplastics market in India, it is valued at 500 million US dollars in the year 2024. However, recently major investments were made in Balrampur Chini mills for this PLA plant in Uttar Pradesh. Right. So in fact, startups like Pool.co converting temple flower waste into biomaterials, and Praj Industries, they are developing bioplastics technology. So therefore, it has highlighting the domestic industry participation in this biomaterials. Now, in fact, the advantages of these biomaterials are that they are bioactive, bio-inert, biocompatible, bio-reabsorbable, bioadaptable. So these are all advantages of the biomaterials, and you can also go through those advantages as well. So the next important topic is poor air quality in Delhi. Right. So let's first understand the context of this topic. The context is that Delhi is the city which has been facing the worst air pollution in the world. Now, very often the air quality index levels are very poor, severe in Delhi. right? So recently the Supreme Court has observed that citizens themselves are direct or indirect contributors to poor air quality in Delhi. Citizens are not responsible when it comes to acting against or taking measures to stop or control air pollution. So therefore the Supreme Court statements highlighted the complexity and shared responsibility underlying this crisis. However, despite several interventions from the government, Supreme Court, and other statutory agencies, the outcomes remain limited, exposing gaps in diagnosis, coordination, and execution of this. There are several factors which are responsible for Delhi's air pollution. What are the factors? For example, stubble burning in places like Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Western UP. So stubble burning is a factor which is actually responsible. Stubble burning. And apart from that, the geographical features, for example, during winter season. So during winter season, the wind speed is very low, right? So this wind speed is very low, and because of that reason there is no chance that these pollutants will not be dispersed. And vehicular emissions is also another factor for air pollution. Vehicular emissions, industrial emissions, construction dust. So these are actually the major factors of Delhi's air pollution, right? So despite several interventions, for example, Commission for Air Quality Management is a statutory body that was established through Parliament's law in the year 2021. The responsibility of the Commission for Air Quality Management is to implement a graded response action plan in Delhi based on the level of air pollution. However, recently the Commission for Air Quality Management is also criticized for its poor assessment and slow response to act against the air pollution. So ultimately, it is the responsibility of the people to come forward and act against pollution in Delhi. Right, so those people who are suffering with the pollution, they are actually responsible for the pollution, and this is what the Supreme Court argument says. So that's all for today, and thank you so much.